Welcome, everybody. My name is David Wilkins. I'm the faculty director of the Center on the Legal Profession, and we are thrilled to have all of you here for a conversation between Professor Alex Whiting and Jack Smith. The Center on the Legal Profession, for those of you who don't know, does exactly what its name suggests. We study the profession that all of you, in one way or another, even if you don't practice law, will be joining. We do a series of empirical research projects, we do conferences, and one of the most important things we do is we try to bring important speakers from a diverse range of backgrounds and viewpoints across the profession to come talk to you about their careers. So in our speaker series, we've had public servants like Brian Stevenson, Anne-Marie Slaughter. We've had leaders of the corporate bar like Kenneth Frazier, the former CEO of Merck, Brad Smith from Microsoft. We've had the Chief Justice of India, Viet Din, the former general counsel of Fox News. We've had a whole range of speakers. And our goal is really to try to give you an opportunity to both see and engage with leading practitioners, many of whom have gone to this very law school. And that is not the only reason we're proud to have Jack here, but it is one. And I have to say, I'm particularly proud because I taught him civil procedure in 1991. And I'm even prouder he still speaks to me after I taught him civil procedure in 1991. So as I said, you're not here to see me or hear from me. So I'm just going to give a few basic ground rules I hope that you will all observe. Please no video or audio recordings. The event is scheduled to begin now and will end at at 2 o'clock, I'm sorry. But we know that many people may have classes. I am not encouraging you to not go to your class. So if you have to go and get up at 1:15 or 1:20, please feel free to do so. There are QR codes, as you can see here, where you can submit questions. And obviously we won't be able to get to all of them, but Alex has agreed to try to bring in some of the questions from the audience. And of course, most of all, and I really don't think I need to say this, but it's important, be respectful. One of the things that I know that Jack will talk about is the importance of respectful engagement as a kind of cornerstone of how he's tried to run his career and what he thinks is important for all of you. And it is certainly something that we here at Harvard Law School can try to model. So I hope everyone will engage in this important conversation in that spirit. With that, I just want to say a brief introduction to a man who needs no introduction. No, not you, Jack. Alex Whiting here. He's a legend in this community as well as he should be, a career prosecutor who's worked in many important international forums, including most recently special counsel, the special counsel's office at the U.S. Department of Justice as an assistant special counsel. And he's also been the Kosovo special prosecutor in the office in The Hague. And he's a brilliant teacher and a Natalie dressed guy. As you can see, we all got the memo. We are the Blues Brothers. So I turn it over to you, Alex. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Jack, welcome back to Harvard Law School.
Thank you very much. It's a very big honor to be here. And we were just talking earlier, my first class at Harvard Law School was Professor Wilkins' Civil Procedure. So it's really nice to be here and to come sort of full circle. So thank you for having me.
So Jack, a little more than a year ago, you left the special counsel's office in the Department of Justice. A few things have changed in that year. Do any of them concern you?
Yeah, so let me start where the perspective I come at that question from. I am not a political person. I am a career prosecutor. I spent 30 years serving the public as a prosecutor in every sort of prosecutorial role you could manage. A local prosecutor, national, international. I worked in the Department of Justice, and I think this is relevant to a lot of what we'll talk about today. I worked in Republican, Democrat administrations over and over again. And I had leadership positions in Democratic and Republican administrations over and over again. I was the chief of the public integrity section, supervising corruption cases around the country during the Obama administration. But I was the chief of criminal litigation in Brooklyn in the Bush administration. And then in President Trump's first administration, I held two different high-level positions, both as the acting U.S. attorney in Nashville, as well as working with Alex overseas as a State Department appointee at an international war crimes tribunal. So I come at it from a perspective of someone who's seen administrations change. It's seen the department and the sort of traditions that we've had for years and really decades. And top line, what we are seeing today is not normal. It's not normal. This is not the usual changes you see when one party or one administration has different priorities. And it does concern me. It concerns me because I see the traditions of the department being set aside because particular outcomes are wanted. I see people being targeted because of their opposition to the president or because he perceives them as an enemy. And I also see cases not being investigated, not looked at because of a fear where an investigation would take them. I think for me personally, I think one of the biggest concerns, and I think one of the ones that we should all be thinking more about, because we see the headlines of individual cases and that concerns us. But for me, I think one of the bigger concerns is the vilification of public servants. The hiring and firing in the Justice Department, I believe, has not gotten enough public attention because we don't really understand the full costs of it. You have public servants who have served for decades in administrations of both parties who are vilified because they are adhering to the ideals about why they became a prosecutor. And then conversely, you have people being brought into the Justice Department who don't believe in those ideals at all. There is, and I don't know how many of you know this, there is an advisor to the current Attorney General who on January 6th, 2021, was at the Capitol telling fellow rioters to kill police officers. It's on video. That person is now advising our Attorney General. And I think that says a lot about where we are, that these public servants who serve for decades are being vilified and people like that are being elevated. So in answer to your question, yes, I do have concerns.
Okay, I want to step back for a moment because you said, you've talked about different administrations and changes in the department. You said this is not normal. You know, with changes in administrations, there are changes in policies of the department, there are changes in personnel. I mean, how much of this is just elections have consequences?
Yeah, I think that's an important sort of foundational question to ask because I think in the sort of like public looking at what happens every day, we sometimes just look at what we don't like, right? Like, I don't like that outcome, or I don't like what they're doing here. And I think that's the wrong focus. Elections do have consequences. And if a new administration or a new party wins an election, they get to decide policy. So if you win and you want to focus more on immigration enforcement and less on environmental protection, elections have consequences. That has to happen. If you want to focus less on corruption and more on fraud, you can do that. And I think sometimes people don't like the policy choices and they confuse that with what I think of as the traditions of the department. The reality is, if you're someone as a young person or a young lawyer and you only want to work on policy things that you agree with personally and would vote for personally, you are probably not cut out to be a career prosecutor. That's probably not the best profession for you. My personal view is that if you want to be a career public servant in the Justice Department, you need to be willing and capable to carry out lawful policies of any administration. That's your job. Your job is not to set policy, it's to carry it out. And so I think that is something that we have to put to one side, but that's a very different thing than not following the traditions of the department.
So what's different? Tell us, like, now focus in on what's different now that's not just change in policy, change in personnel. What are the red lines?
Yeah, so a couple, I'll give you some examples, and then I can give you kind of some ways to think about it. You see career prosecutors, people who came up through the department like I did, you see them being fired or resigning because, you know, they don't want to investigate the family of a shooting victim, right? They don't want to charge senators and congressmen for exercising their First Amendment rights. They don't want to be part of a deal where we dismiss a case in hopes that a mayor will change his policies to be consistent with the president's policies. They're stepping down because those are not policy things. That's about doing the job the correct way. And those sort of examples that we've seen over the last year, I put them into two buckets or two categories that you can think about them. And the first is this, process versus outcomes. If you have a prosecutor who is so dead set on getting a certain outcome that they don't care how they get there, you should be very suspicious of that prosecutor. If part of the reason the Department of Justice works is the policies of the department have come about over years, right? They have been developed by people who have spent decades learning their craft, learning what works, learning what's fair. And when you start throwing that all out and you're like, I really don't care how we get there, we just need to charge this person, that's obviously dangerous. And you don't have to look far outside of our system to know that. When you look internationally, right, you've heard the term show trials, right? Stalin had show trials. The Nazis had show trials. More recently, Alexei Navalny in Russia. These are trials where the outcome is not in question, right? And the process is whatever process is necessary to get to the outcome you want. And so when I evaluate the things that we're seeing today, I think about process and is there a process or is there an outcome? You look at the cases, for example, of Letitia James and James Comey. There was a message to the Attorney General, right, that wasn't supposed to be public but was, that said you have to go after these people. And then immediately after, they went after those people, even though the career prosecutor said there was no case. That's not process. That is, I want this particular outcome. You look at...
Can I jump in on that one? And I want you to keep going with your examples, so hold that. But on process outcome and targeting individuals, how are those examples different from cases where the department identifies certain individuals that they target for prosecution because they're they lead a gang or they're terrorists or they're or something like that, and they build a case, are going to target that person and they build a case against them? How is that different from Comey, Letitia James? Where's the line there?
Well, I think the beginning of your question kind of answers it. If there's a gang problem, then you're going to look at who the gang leader was. If you have a crime problem in the neighborhood, you're going to look at who's causing that crime problem. If you have a phenomena of crime, you're going to look who the leaders were who could have started that. In the Letitia James case, that is a mortgage fraud of that level in my experience. I've never heard of that low a number ever being prosecuted, much less from, again, I don't know, I'm not in the department anymore, but the facts as I understand them are such that I've never heard of a case on those facts being brought. I've never heard, I've done this for 30 years, the department having to go to multiple grand juries repeatedly to try to get an indictment of that nature. When you start seeing stuff like that, it's so counter to process. That's very, very different then
So it's also about, process and outcome is also about why the person is being targeted. Or maybe process is a question of why they're being targeted and for what reasons. And there are legitimate reasons and illegitimate reasons.
that's for certain. But I guess what I'm saying is, in addition to that, when you see that there's a direction that we're going to get to this outcome no matter what, generally what you'll see is that the prosecutors blow through all the normal processes you would get to that, because they can't be troubled, because those processes could stop you, right? If you're told to search somebody's house and you put together a search warrant and it turns out there's not probable cause to get that search warrant, well, that's a process problem, right, for you. You got to blow through that if you were told you're going to search their house no matter what. And
We were just doing this in class today, so very
Okay.
timely. For my students out there, very timely. Thank you. That was not planted. Go ahead.
It was not. So I think these examples where you see a process being put aside, and another way I think about process is, when I was in the department, things work from the bottom to the top, right? A line prosecutor, an apolitical, nonpartisan prosecutor, looks at the facts and the law and says, I want to go forward in this case. I need these approvals to take these investigative steps. I need these approvals. It doesn't come from the top down. It doesn't come, I want you to prosecute this person. Let me find someone who's willing to do that. And again, I think what I find really unusual, and as I said before, not normal, is you're seeing in many of these cases, they can't even get a prosecutor in the office where they're prosecuting the case to go in the grand jury or to do the work. If you're not in the Justice Department, that may seem like, well, I don't know, maybe that happens. I'm here to tell you that is not normal. That is not a thing that happens, and it's a sign that the normal processes are not being followed. The same thing, just again, going back to the James and Comey cases, my understanding from the reporting is that the local prosecutors there actually wrote a memo saying, here's the facts and the law, which is what should guide this, and there's no case. And despite that, they fired the chief prosecutor, who they had put in place to bring somebody in to prosecute a case who had never prosecuted a case before. Again, never heard of anything like that. It's a pretty good indication processes aren't being followed. The other point, if I could get to it, is the second point, and this would be for those of you in the audience who are ever thinking of being prosecutors and like to pursue that career. 2 words I have for you. 2 words that are as important as you will hear, and it's this: facts matter. The facts actually matter. And one of the things that I see in the Justice Department today is that that's not the case. And in fact, you see where there is a concern on the leaders of the department's part that those facts could lead them somewhere they don't want to go. They make sure those facts aren't followed. A good prosecutor goes where the facts take them. I can't tell you how many times in my career I've started an investigation with an understanding of certain facts, and a full investigation showed me that what I looked at originally, it didn't happen like that at all. I might know 3 facts, and they seem to really drive in one direction, and then when I compile 97 other facts, it's a completely different story. Prosecutors, good ones, have to be able to change their judgments no matter how much work they put in to go where the facts take them. And what I see in this administration is situations where a reticence to follow the facts because it will involve prosecuting or investigating somebody they know the president doesn't want them to prosecute or investigate. There's numerous examples of this. You could start with, I think it was referred to as Signalgate, where they were talking over a Signal app about war plans, what were clearly classified war plans. I can tell you with certainty that there is no administration, Republican or Democrat, since I've been a prosecutor, that would not open an investigation in that case. But in that particular, and I'm not going to say where that would come out, like how that would turn out, because as I said, you don't know in the beginning. But if you remember, in that case, the Attorney General said there would be no investigation the very day it came out, to shut that down. didn't want to know the facts, just didn't want to have an investigation. We're seeing the same thing now in Minnesota, where victims of police shootings are being called domestic terrorists, again, before a single fact is collected, and then blocking local authorities from investigating that. That is the antithesis of facts matter. And to be clear, I don't profess to know how an investigation would turn out. Part of what a good prosecutor does is not comment on how things might turn out until they do the investigation. So I think people on both sides saying if it's a crime or not a crime is not how we should do things. But if you shut the door to facts, you shut the door to the rule of law. You shut the door to getting outcomes that the public can trust.
Okay, so importance of process, importance of facts. These are the themes that link together red lines that have been crossed in the department today. It sounds like before we even think about how we might rebuild the department, there are certain first principles that we have to think about. What are those first principles?
Well, as I said, these two, right? Like process matters, following the facts matters, keeping politics out of the decision-making of prosecutors matters. I also think that one of the sort of first principles we need to talk about and think about is how to protect apolitical, nonpartisan public servants so they can do their jobs. Because when you don't follow the facts and when process doesn't matter and integrity doesn't matter, the Justice Department can't do its job in lots of ways beyond these cases that we're talking about now. If the Justice Department is not inhabited by people who have integrity and who can follow the facts and the law without fear or favor, one, they just can't do the job, but they're also not going to be trusted. A big thing I have seen through my 30 years as a prosecutor, we've seen this in the international setting as well, is that the rule of law does not enforce itself. You can't just have a law book and say, hey, there's a law in the books, you did wrong, please report to prison for the appropriate sentence, or decide which cases to bring or not bring. It takes people of high integrity who function based on ideals that we all agree on about truth and integrity to make those calls, to make the sacrifices to make those calls. And unless we protect those people, it's very hard to have outcomes that the rest of us can trust. And so I think one of the things that for someone who loves the department and is now outside it, seeing the loss of credibility that department prosecutors have had with the courts over the last year, it's been just saddening to me. One judge said, credibility that has been built up over years has been lost in weeks. And it's not just in these cases that we're talking about where people are being targeted. When judges and juries don't trust prosecutors, they're going to start not trusting them for other things too. Things that we want for them to protect our communities from violence, to protect us from fraud, to fight corruption. And basically the sort of mission the department has broadly, it's not capable of doing that anymore. Another way I think about it is this. To have a public institution that functions, right, that actually can do what you set it up to do, you need three things. And this particularly, in my mind, goes to the Justice Department. You need competence, you need integrity, and with integrity I'll put independence. And then the third is you need to be able to communicate those things to the public. So
let's break those down. You've talked a little bit about integrity, but I want to come back to that because there's, I think, more to say about it. But competence, what do you mean by that? Like, how does that figure in here?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I, again, from where I personally sit, living my life and having had my career that I'm really concerned about is part of what I see as an attack on the rule of law is an attack on competence, right? We think that someone who spent decades learning their craft and how to do something the right way for the right reasons, that doesn't really matter anymore. We can just put somebody in who's never done that before, and they'll just do it. And I think of the example. Imagine if you had a heart problem or needed brain surgery. Would you ever say, well, this person's a great surgeon, but I'm not really sure I like their politics. This person has never performed surgery ever once in their life, but I feel policy-wise we're the same. You'd never do that. And I think, yeah.
Can you translate that into, because I think everybody intuitively gets that, right? That a heart surgeon right? But how do you translate that into the Department of Justice? And maybe you can speak a little bit about your own trajectory. Yeah. You started as an ADA in Manhattan, became an AUSA, and then you have moved into leadership positions. Talk about competence in the department and what exactly that means.
Yeah, so I mean, and just to frame it, I think part of the challenge is how I understand being a prosecutor, the expertise it requires. I understand it like that, and I think a lot of people outside the department don't understand being a heart surgeon and being a prosecutor handling complex cases, that they're really analogous.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so to give you an example, I think ethically and by integrity, I'm the same person I was when I was 25 years old, when I became a prosecutor for the first time after leaving the school. If someone had told me, hey, Jack, you're a good guy, you got your head on straight, we want you to take on the role of investigating war crimes around the world or serving as special counsel. You're a good person, you'll figure it out. That would not have gone well.
Right? Why not? Why not? Like, I want to get sort of specific here. Like, I mean, I get it, and I believe you. But can you be like, when you're a heart surgeon, it's very technical, and you learn all the special. Like, what is it that you gain in it? What does competence mean in the department? What is it? Right?
Sure. There's so many different skills, and so I give you a few. But like, you're interviewing a really important witness in a very big case that everybody in the world is watching, right? And you have to decide through the course of that interview if this person is credible or not, if they're telling the truth on difficult subjects. If that's your first interview, you're not going to know the sort of tells that happen or how to test someone's credibility. But if you interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people like we have in our career, you're going to know how to do that. If you've never handled a major national security case and you don't know the intricacies of the department requirements to take investigative steps, it's not even just a matter of intelligence. It's experience and judgment. And when you're running a complex investigation or a prosecutor's office as a U.S. attorney, you're recalled to make judgments every day that require both integrity for sure, but also experience because you've seen a version of this problem many times before, and also just skill. Like if a lawyer comes into your office and they have a big trial tomorrow and they have to cross-examine somebody and they need help, if you've never ever done that or even really watched it, you're not going to be of any help to them. But if you have and you can, that office is going to have better outcomes and serve the public better. And so I think a lot of the things that lawyers do, people don't understand that you're a lot better having done them after a couple of decades than when you first start doing them. Of course, we know that in all professions, but I don't think we understand the degree of difference. And the last thing I'll say on this topic is one of the great things that I've enjoyed about working in the department is the career people who've been there for decades. They know their substantive areas so well, and one of the great things of being a prosecutor in the department is you can lean on those people and rely on those people and ask for their advice about how to handle things. When I was at the public integrity section, that is sort of the clearinghouse for expertise on political corruption cases. And so prosecutors from around the country would call us and ask our advice or get our approval for certain investigative steps. And that made it a lot more likely things were going to be done well and the right way and for the right reasons. The public integrity section is in essence, I mean, it's technically there, but it's in essence been disbanded as I understand it. And as I say, I think that's a jettisoning of expertise at the cost of the rule of law. That trying to get rid of people who can say how things should be done makes it easier to just get the outcomes that you really want to get.
It's actually not going to be the last thing you say on it because I have one more question on this. I just want to press again a little bit further on this, which is to say, like, ask you, can you, so first of all, you've sometimes talked about this experience as getting reps, and you've said it, like getting, doing hundreds of interviews, seeing cases over and over again, and building up to a point where you have, and I think this is the important word, you said judgment, right, to make these decisions. But what is, you've kind of touched on it a little bit, but I just wonder if you can say more about what's the consequence for the department losing career people who've been there for decades, who are in senior positions, whether it's in public integrity, national security, narcotics, terror, whatever, across the department. What's the consequence for the department losing that kind of level of competence?
Well, I think there isn't just one consequence. The easiest one is one of, well, you'll just do things wrong in a way that when it comes time to go to court, you'll lose a case you should have won and a case that would have been good for the public and for the American people if you had won. But you just aren't that good at it because you haven't done it before. I think maybe what you're getting at is a deeper problem, is that the people, in my experience, who inhabited these roles, they did things the right way, and they did it for the right reasons. And you knew that if there was a decision to prosecute someone, that it wasn't for political reasons because these people wouldn't stand for it. And I think that's one of the reasons you're seeing a lot of these resignations is because people don't want to be a part of that. That gives a confidence not only whether you're going to win or lose in court is one thing, but whether you're doing things the right way and whether people in the public can trust that, hey, I don't have time to read the whole case file in this case, but how you seem to be going about your job, I feel like I can trust that. We need to have that trust in our government generally, but particularly in the Department of Justice, given the great powers that prosecutors have, the great discretion that prosecutors have.
Okay, now, so you said competence, integrity, communication. Let's go back to integrity and independence. How does that translate in the department? You've said a little bit about integrity. Can you say more about it and about independence? What does that mean in the Department of Justice? Because the Department of Justice, part of the unitary executive, part of, right? So what does that mean exactly?
Yeah, so I can talk about the Department of Justice that I kind of grew up in, from a line prosecutor taking direction to someone eventually giving direction. And in my prosecutorial career, the idea that you would go after someone or not go after someone because of their politics, it was just not on the table. I say all the time, my first boss was a guy by the name of Gene Porcaro. He was the chief of the section I was in at the district attorney's office before I was a federal prosecutor. If I had told him, hey, I'm going to go after this guy because he's a political enemy of the DA, or I'm going to not go after this guy even though we've got a good case because he's a friend of the DA, my boss would have literally thrown me out a window. I mean, it was so far from how anybody would talk or think. And early in my career, the questions we're talking about now, it wasn't like it was on the table as a discussion. And I think that the people, in my view, who've served in the department for decades, many of whom who've either been fired or forced to resign, they were the keepers of that ethic. You knew that you may not like the decision, but it was made in good faith. And that means a lot. And so I think losing that is a tremendous loss. And again, I think, for example, if you're a corruption prosecutor, right? Any case you bring, somebody's going to think you're great and someone's going to think you stink, right? Depending on who the defendant is. And what good career prosecutors know is that none of that stuff matters. The people who like you today won't like you tomorrow, and then they'll like you again, and then they won't. It's all noise. I think people who are responsive to news cycles and have to get their message out today, that is not the sort of people you want making decisions about prosecuting people and taking away their liberty. The people I knew who were prosecutors would never let that sort of stuff affect their thinking. And so those two first building blocks, like I know how to do this job actually. Like I actually am competent and qualified to do it. And the second is I can be trusted to do it fairly. You can trust me because I don't have a horse in the race politically. I don't have a horse in the race wanting a certain outcome for me personally. Without those, you can't even have a conversation about having the rule of law. But then we get to the third topic.
Right, and it's about communication, and you just alluded to that about news cycles and communication. How do you communicate this to the public, and how much is communication part of your success as a good prosecutor?
Yeah, so this is the one for me that these days I spend the most time thinking about. And part of the reason is, well, the first two, competence and integrity, are foundational. They're not hard. We've done that. We actually, at least the people I worked with, we knew how to do that. I think communicating to the public that you are competent and that you can be trusted is really hard today, given how we all talk and communicate with each other. Getting people to listen who don't already agree with you, just culturally these days, is really challenging. And I think it's particularly hard for prosecutors because there are rules, right? Like you do not want to say something when a case is pending that would interfere with someone's right to a fair trial, right? You do not want to say something that would violate the local rules because every federal court has local rules that very specifically limit the things prosecutors can say when a case is pending. But we also have a reality where powerful defendants can have whole communications teams out there repetitively saying things that are not true, that are misinformation, that will get a certain group of people, a certain part of our society, believing things that aren't true. And you don't have a mechanism to push back on that. And so I don't have a solution to this, but what I do think is that we need to start having a conversation where people like me who know what you're supposed to do this job right, start talking to, frankly, younger people who understand how we communicate with each other these days and coming up with solutions to that. I'm not sure there'll ever be a perfect one because there's a tension between what a prosecutor can and should say when a case is pending. But I think as we sort of think ahead, this strikes me as one of the things that we need to get better at, and we need to, particularly in my mind, communicate not just in like the legal community and not just in sort of like institutions like Harvard Law School. We need to find a way for prosecutors to communicate with people who don't get to go to Harvard Law School and are in communities that don't have access to a lot of the things we have access to in a place like this. I think that is very doable. I think prosecutors do stuff like that all the time. Like when we, as a prosecutor, when I argue a case to a jury, right, I'm pulling in people from all over a community. When I was a prosecutor in New York, you can imagine how diverse that jury pool is, right? And I had to get people who came from all different sorts of backgrounds, all different sorts of perspectives. The only way I win is if I convince them unanimously that I have it right here. Now, by the time we get there, I should have vetted my facts and law really well that I should be able to do that. But I think we, in this divisive time we're living in, we underrate our ability to sort of reach out to people who we disagree with. It's uncomfortable to do that. But I think we got to start finding ways personally and individually to do that if we want to, once we have competence, integrity, if we want people to really believe that's true.
So maybe with communication, as you say, prosecutors can't live by the news cycle. That'll undermine their integrity, but maybe it's a matter of others speaking in that space, right? For prosecutors, filling that space about what's really going on, to try to balance out the communication.
Yeah, like I said, I do not sit here telling you I have all the solutions. I would share them with you if I did. But I do think that we need to like rethink it and think about it. We can't ever do anything that makes it less likely someone's going to get a fair trial. That's a red line. We can't do that. But there do have to be ways that we can say things that go beyond, the sort of circles. When I came up as a prosecutor, you talked in the courtroom and not on the media steps. And if someone decided you really had to give a press conference, you guys have seen those things, right? I get up there and say the most boring thing possible that no one ever remembers, and I knocked it out, and thank you, goodbye. And I'll say, like in my career, and this is like a learning experience for me, I probably was someone who erred on the side of saying less for never wanting to be ever accused of interfering with someone's right to a fair trial, and never wanting to sort of like showboat or try to be, in the media when I didn't need to. I think you got to do it for the right reasons, but I think that's a component of the job that I early in my career didn't see as part of my job, and I now think that for the next leaders of the department, that is going to be a really important part of the job. But at the same time, I wouldn't want the next leaders of the department to be communication specialists who didn't really know the traditions of the department. You gotta have both. It's a new skill set to add to the old.
So I'm starting to get some questions from the audience. And some of these are questions that I actually are already on my outline, but this one I had not thought of. And it kind of goes back, you talked about lawyers at the DOJ resigning. They're kind of, that's a sort of double-edged thing, right? So on the one hand, they're resigning under principle. On the other hand, or because they just can't work in that environment for reasons you've been talking about. But on the other hand, then they leaving space for other lawyers, that may not have the competence, may not have the integrity, may not have the same principles, the same experience to come in and fill those jobs. So how should lawyers in the department think about that? Should they stay and fight the fight? Should they resign on principle? How do they resolve that?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, and it's interesting in part because it's a question I think most prosecutors in the department never thought they'd have to ask themselves that question. And so they're being asked to sort of make a really important decision about their own lives on a question that they really never thought was going to come up when they took a career path. My personal view of it, and this goes for both people in the department and people, if you're in the audience, who are thinking maybe you were interested in a career in the department in the future. What I would say is that the costs have changed, but the question hasn't. If you believe in public service, if you believe in serving members of your community, you should still do that. Now, if you are asked to carry out a policy thing that you don't really like, but it's a policy thing, I think you got to do that. And I think if you're not willing to do that, as I said in the beginning, I don't think that's how a career prosecutor behaves. And I think then maybe being in the department and in a non-political position is not for you. On the other hand, well, I tell people all the time to stay in the department because it's those people who are continuing to make it work. As bad as some of the things we've talked about today, it could be a lot worse. It could be a lot worse if a lot of the people who believe in the rule of law and are sacrificing for all of us by staying in the department if they didn't stay. But at the same time, you get to a point where you're asked to do something that's unethical, and you're asked to do something that violates your oath as a public servant. Then when that happens, you can't stay. I get it. And I think what I tell people is you're going to know. It's a big decision and it's hard, but I think particularly experienced prosecutors are going to know the difference between those two. So my advice and my position is that people should continue to serve, and people should continue for the same reasons they went into the service in the first place.
Jack, you've talked a number of times, you've used the phrase, the rule of law. Um, and I want to kind of look at this from that frame. Think about the rule of law. What is that? What is that? Can mean a lot of things to different people. Like that phrase can be used in lots of different ways. What does the rule of law mean to you? And is it under threat today in the United States?
Yeah. So I think of the rule of law distilled down. What it means to me is treating people equally under the law. It's really that simple in my mind. And what I mean by that is it shouldn't matter your politics, your race, your gender, all those things shouldn't matter. It should be the same for everybody. Now, to be very clear, I'm not saying that the department throughout its history has always done a great job of that. But what I will say is that during my career, what I saw is that people were always trying. People were working towards that. That was an ideal that we sought. I think the rule of law is under attack today because I'm not sure the leaders of the department have that same orientation. I think the leaders of the department now are willing to carry out the president's bidding, and that means protecting allies and going after enemies. And that's the opposite of treating everybody equal. So I think the examples we've seen that we've talked about a little today show it is under threat, but I also think that it is a situation where, as bad as things can seem sometimes, there's a lot of things all of us can do to kind of push back on that. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to do, each of us, what we can to push back on those sort of things.
So I have another audience question, and I think I know you pretty well, but I don't know how you're going to answer this question.
All right.
You ready for it?
I don't know.
Who is your hero in life or the legal profession? We're not talking cycling here, right?
Wow.
In life, they'll give you a second. Life or the legal profession, how does that hero help you do your job better?
It's funny, like, I would honestly say this is going to come out, my dad probably. So I grew up in a place where I'm the first person in my family to go to college. We were talking about this earlier. Where I grew up, people did not wear suits and ties. My dad worked in a factory most of his life. My dad supervised 0 people in his life. He never supervised a single person. But he gave me the tools for my career. And it's funny because when he and I talk, he just can't imagine the world that I'm in and the things that I've done in my life. But I couldn't have done them without the sort of foundation he gave me.
Say more.
Yeah, well, like, so for example, like you and I have worked together in a couple different iterations. And I have developed how I like to lead a place. And a lot of that comes from my dad, who never led a single place, because when I was a kid, he would come home, he would talk about the people who led him and how they behaved. And if they looked out for their people, if they were out for themselves, how they treated people above them and below them. And that was really important to me. And, when you're a parent, I'm now a parent, and I can't figure out what my kid's going to remember or not. And I'm sure there were a lot of things my dad really wanted to impress on me that I've completely forgotten. But hearing him talk about those situations and who he admired and who he didn't and how he reacted to that, I think it informed a lot of who I want to be, at least. Maybe I don't know who I am, but who I want to be. So I don't know how helpful an answer that is, but I think that's the best I have for you.
It's a great answer. This is going to be a little bit of a pivot, but you've mentioned a couple times working overseas. You worked in 2 positions overseas. You worked at the International Criminal Court. You were the investigations coordinator, and then just before your appointment to special counsel, you were the specialist prosecutor of the Kosovo Specialist Chambers in The Hague, which was a court dedicated to investigating crimes in Kosovo during the war. Those are international, very different experiences. How do those experiences inform how you think about these issues about the department? How did they shape you? What did you learn from those experiences?
Yeah. So they made me better prosecutors, right? Because some of the cases we worked on overseas, massive cases, all sorts of challenges in investigation and prosecution that we don't have here. Learning how to adapt to completely different systems, to completely different laws, things like that. That goes back to what I was saying before about like, until you have this range of experiences, you can't be the person capable of doing these more complex things. So that's on like a practical level. But also, and I think you probably had the same experience, you see in these places where we investigated war crimes, you saw the rule of law sort of fall off the shelf. And what you saw is, what I saw repeatedly is it's where the social fabric broke down. It's where people ended up saying, well, the elites in the society are not following the rules, why should I follow them? And usually corruption was a precursor to violence. That's what happened in a lot of the places we were at, the ICC and other places. And it makes me concerned because I think that we have had the rule of law function in our country for so long that we take it for granted. We just assume that it's permanently durable and that no matter what we do and what anybody does, it's just going to keep functioning. And I've seen places that thought that, and then there was a day that that didn't happen anymore. And I think what history shows you, if you look at these examples, it is that once that contract breaks and once you lose that, it is so hard to get it back and to build it back. And so that's why I think we're at such an important point now, because we still do have the rule of law. There's a lot of people who believe in the things we're talking about today and who are willing to sacrifice for them. And I think it's important to make it a front and center issue because I know that once you lose it, it's much harder to get back.
Another audience question. The job of public service has become much more in the spotlight. If you are, and it's not just the senior people, but line prosecutors are now, get a lot. There's a lot of public attention. There's a lot of partisanship. There's a lot of controversy. Right? How, if you're thinking about public service, how do you think about this dimension of it, of how you deal with that spotlight, with attacks, with, you said before, there are people are going to hate you, people are going to like. How do you kind of deal with that in your profession?
Well, my personal view is that someone who really craves attention and someone who really craves approval, I would direct you not to be a prosecutor. I don't think that someone who that is what drives them. I don't think you're probably the best candidate for a career as a prosecutor because you have to be, you cannot let that drive what you do. The attention's unfortunate because, the way my career has worked out, here I am talking to you today, right? But I never sought or craved that attention. And I think that now the pressure that's put on public servants, the threats that people face, the sort of like that you have to think, well, if I take this job, my family could come under threat. That's crazy. That's absolute crazy. And we should pause and think about how we got here and what individually all of us could do to turn that in the other direction, because over time there'll be really good people who could really do great things for our country. We're going to do a calculation and say, well, I'm willing to pay these costs, but I'm not paying that costs. And I think that's the sort of longer term costs I'm worried about. And so I think that's what you bring up is real. But I also think that all public service has costs. And one phrase I've heard that I like a lot is, if it's not hard, it's not service. And so, if you think you're doing something to help, if it's not hard, maybe think again, because you could probably do a little more. I do think the threats and everything are a different thing. But people who really want to make a difference in public service have to be willing to sacrifice.
So this is a question I got from the audience, but it was also my outline.
You want to take credit for that? That's your
I do. Yeah, I anticipate it. Yeah.
Okay, Alex, they're all your questions.
Thank you. I thought of it. It's an obvious question. So 30 something years ago, you were out there in the audience at this school listening to people. Can you talk about your experience at Harvard Law School? And are there particular, aside from Professor Wilkins, are there particular things that you remember that shaped you, that were important to you when you were in law school?
Yeah. So let me start with my sort of like Harvard Law School origin story. So in our class in '94, I was the last guy who got in. I was on the wait list. I was driving my Dodge Daytona, leaking oil, down to the University of Virginia. And on the way down, we didn't have cell phones then. They called my house and they said, "Hey, would you be interested in coming to Harvard?" I stopped in New Jersey at a friend's house. And on Friday afternoon, the office calls and they say, "Hey, if we offered you a position, a spot, would you take it?" And I said, "Listen, I got a car leaking oil downstairs with a UVA sticker on it, so it has to be like an offer. So they call me back and they're like, "Okay, we offer you it." And then I hammered out my financial aid, a good lawyer practice, right? I hammered out my financial aid that afternoon and I just turned my car up and drove to Harvard. So I get here, and I've told you this story before. I get here and I'm excited, right? I've never been in an environment like this. I went to a state school, as I told you, no one in my family going to college. And I go to the admin people and they give me my room and I truck my stuff to my room and I get to my room and there's another guy in my room. And I'm like, "Hey," it's kind of like on the airplane, right? Like, "Hey, this is my," and it turns out it was his room. And so I don't have a room. So Ames Hall over there had all my stuff in the closet at the end of the hall there for a night. And then eventually I got a room on that hall, on the International Students Hall. And it was just,
Wait, but in the version I heard of this
Yeah.
story, you spent some nights in that
I
closet.
spent a night or two there because they didn't
In
have
the
a place for
closet?
me. Yeah, but it was a big closet. And I was just so happy to be here, Alex. But I tell the story. It's kind of a crazy story, but what I came away from that was like I just felt so lucky to be here. I just felt so lucky to have this opportunity to be. We were talking about this earlier about to be with people who would push me and test me and make me better. And so for my time here, the things I would give y'all in terms of what I learned was what was really useful to me was when practitioners either came to campus or practitioners like Professor Ogletree for me um, told me about their lives and their careers because it gave me a window onto what I wanted to do because I had no friends or library of experiences to compare the different sorts of careers I would have. I also tried to use like the different activities you can do here. I did the Prison Legal Assistance Project. I did a bunch of different clinical programs to sort of test out different careers and see what fit me. And I did a little of everything. And I think in doing that, I got very lucky and I picked a path that I really liked from the beginning. And I didn't end up switching too much because I really enjoyed what I was doing. And so part of what I would say to folks here is, use your time here to learn from people who've trod different paths that you might want to follow. And then the other thing I would say is one thing I've learned in my career is like what a privilege public service is. And if you're considering it as one of the things you're going to do, really give it a try. It's been, other than my family, it's been one of the biggest blessings in my life. And it has a centering effect on you and on your lives. And this is a great place. There's a lot of ways that this institution supports that. And so take advantage of that if you can. You don't have to like game out. I know a lot of Harvard Law students have a plan of where they're going to be at 40 and 50 and 60. We all who are that age know the world doesn't work like that. Show up, be excellent at what you do, and opportunities will come. But I think this is a great place to kind of try out those things so you can try the different paths you're considering and see people who've walked where you want to walk.
Are there particular people who inspired you here?
Professor Ogletree in particular was someone who, just because he'd done this groundbreaking work as a public defender and the way he spent time with his students, also Professor Streicher, who was my advisor for my paper, this was a new environment. I'd never been in an Ivy League school before. And so people who took an interest and took time to kind of help me, I think maybe I might have needed more help than some in terms of figuring my career path. That meant a lot to me.
On your career path, why did you go to the Manhattan DA's office? Why did you choose that path? Like, how did you go that route?
Well, it was partially from my time here at Harvard. I had done a number of different clinical programs. I'd done an internship at the Norfolk DA's office. I'd also done an internship at the U.S. Attorney's office. And the assistant U.S. attorney I was assigned to was a great guy. His name was Brad Bailey. And this is why I say this, is like, I was watching him do his job and I was like, this is so cool, man. I would like to do this. And I wouldn't have known that because I'd never been around a prosecutor before. And I just liked it. And that inspired me to want to really try being a prosecutor. And then the Manhattan DA's office to me is the most storied prosecutor's office in the country. And I will say too that my 5 years there, of all the things I've done, by far the most fun I've ever had professionally.
Why?
Because it was just so crazy. It was just so different than I grew up, the environment I grew up in. You're trying cases all the time. You're like, you grow up on TV and you see people arguing cases to juries, and you're like, oh my God, I'm doing that right now. You're helping people and you're interacting with people who come from completely different backgrounds than you, and sometimes they're hostile to you, sometimes they need your help, and you're just being tested every day in a million different ways. And I also loved about the job that, like, people just cared about doing the right thing. Like, nobody was there to make a lot of money. Nobody was there because they were going to be in the newspaper for doing some case. No one cared about the cases we were doing. You just did it. I did a lot of domestic violence cases, helping domestic violence victims. These cases were not in the newspaper. No one's following it. But it was incredibly meaningful work. And so I just loved it. I mean, my first job, $28,000 a year I was making. $28,000 a year, and I felt like the luckiest guy in the world. So perfect way to start a career for me.
And then you have this remarkable career from Manhattan DA's office, Eastern District of New York, U.S. Attorney's Office, International Criminal Court, Public Integrity Unit, U.S. Attorney's Office in Tennessee, brief stint in private practice for about 9 months or so. Then immediately got out of that and became the specialist prosecutor in The Hague, and then special counsel, and then guest at Harvard Law School, right? To top it all off. What is there, like, looking back, was there a kind of method to that path? Was there, like, what's the thread that ties that together? What was your motive, like your kind of guiding principle there?
Yeah, there was definitely no like master plan at all, and I think my colleagues who've had a master plan have never seen anybody who had actually worked out that way. I really liked what I was doing at every job I had, and generally that led to somebody asking me, "Hey, have you thought about doing this?" And if it seemed interesting, it's something I applied to do afterwards. And I never really knew where it was going. I was much more focused. I guess one way I would put it is I was much more focused on like what was right in front of me, doing the cases in front of me, and really going back to the competence issue, I was really, really interested in getting good at my craft. Like, I really wanted to learn to try cases well. I really wanted to learn to investigate. When I became a federal prosecutor, I wanted to learn how that was different and how I could do more for a community in that position than I did as a state prosecutor. So I was so like right in what I was doing that the idea that this is going to lead to something or go somewhere else, that was never really part of the plan.
So we've talked about you when you were out there and your career and your path. Now you're up here on the stage and you're speaking to students who are trying to figure out what they're going to do, what their path is going to be. Let's talk about things that you would say to them. What are the guiding principles for them? How should they be thinking about their career? How should they be thinking about the choices they have, both as graduates of this law school, but also in the current climate that we're in?
Yeah. So I guess the first thing I would say is that if you're in this room and you're a student at this law school, you're in a privileged place. And one of the questions you have to ask yourself is, what are you going to do with that privilege? You have a lot of choices. Everybody who goes to this school has a lot of options. I chose public service, and everyone thinks their story is great, particularly if they enjoyed their career. So I'm a big advocate of public service. I think the moment we're in right now, a few things I would say is the first is it is very easy in moments like we're in now to get disillusioned about things. And I hear from young people who are like, I was going to pursue public service, but now I'm not. And I was going to go to the Justice Department, but now I'm not. And part of being an effective public servant is developing resilience. And yes, people who are in your shoes now are being asked at an earlier age to develop that resilience than, say, I was at my career. But that happens all the time. And it's okay to get disillusioned when something, an institution you care about starts going in the wrong direction. But I will say that my experience is that disillusioned people don't lead interesting lives. They don't get things done. And it doesn't lead anywhere good. I think that one of the biggest things that's important to me right now is that rather than all of us asking someone to fix things and someone to save us and someone to right all these wrongs, we should really all be looking at ourselves and saying, all right, what can I do? What is the little, I can't do everything, I can't change everything today, but what is the little thing, incremental thing I can do? And in moments like this, part of the whole process is to make it so you're meant to feel like you can't do anything and that you're very alone. You look at the attempt last week to indict these senators and congressmen. It was meant to inspire fear. It was meant to make people self-censor and not speak up. But the reaction of those folks was courage. And fear is contagious, but so is courage. And so some of the things I would say just as a general sort of way to think about this moment is, one, don't put it on others. See what you can do, even if it's small. I think it's really important to support people who are willing to speak up. I can tell you from where I sit that really matters. And it has a snowball effect because someone speaks up, despite the fear, they're supported. Someone else says, wow, geez, that person did that, I'll do that. I think that's really important. I think all of us can play a role in that. The other two things I think are harder. And the first is that we need to have dialogue with people that we disagree with. And a lot of people talk about that, but I don't see as many people actually doing it. We tend to talk to people who agree with us and have the same kind of view of the world or are in the same sort of social circles or academic circles. And my view is if we're going to come out of this better, which I personally believe we will, we need to be purposeful about finding ways to communicate with people who do not share our views. I think it's incredibly important that we do it respectfully, that we don't engage in sort of like ad hominem attacks or screaming and yelling and things of that nature. We treat people the right way, not because they deserve it, but because that's who we are. And that stuff's hard. None of us want to do it. It's much easier to talk to friends who agree with you and say how this thing that happened last week is awful and the next thing's awful. I would say to people who believe they care about these things, to find ways to reach out to people who you disagree with and not tell them why you're right, but listen and see if you can find common ground. I think that's really important. It's a skill prosecutors have when you interview witnesses, people from different backgrounds. You have to be able to listen and see if you can find ways that they can hear you and you can hear them. And the last thing I would just say is on that topic, I know it's very easy to think we're so divided that these things are impossible, but I come to it from the perspective of a prosecutor who has this job of like convincing 12 people, right, who come from all different perspectives. And I think that despite the most extreme things getting the most popularity, I think that the common values that have guided my career and have been sort of the foundations of the Department of Justice, I think they're still there. Respecting each other, behaving with kindness, having integrity, being honest. I can't tell you how many times I get people who come up to me and tell me how much they value those things. These aren't people who are on TV or people who are, tweeting or whatever social media medium they use. I feel like that is there, and I think if we support that and we try to talk to people we differ with about kind of common values, I feel like that is a sort of thing. Everybody's got control of doing that. It's not maybe comfortable, but we can all do it. And I think that is a real foundation for the sort of changes we're going to need to see going forward with the Department of Justice and other institutions that are affected by the issues we're seeing now with the rule of law.
You said something about talking to people who disagree with you, and I wonder if there's examples you can give of that in your life, how you lead a life that way, but also how you can tie that to how you run an office.
Yeah. So,
because I know this
yeah.
about you.
So let me take it in reverse. So like one of the things I've learned, goes to like how you run an office, is people don't like to speak uphill. They do not like to tell the boss he's wrong. Just as a general matter, all of us, I know I'm that way, all of us are that way. And so if you're a boss and you want to get different points of view and you want to have like a real like honest discussion about things, you need to create an environment that empowers people to speak up when it would naturally make sense maybe not to. And so, as you know, Alex, one of the things I will do early on when I'm at a place is I will have a big meeting and I will look for a young, low-ranking person who says something really smart. And I will really raise that person up to show that like, and generally it's the best if it's really smart and it's different than what I think, right? And that creates an environment where people are like, oh, this guy actually wants to hear if he's wrong. And you just make such better decisions that sort of way. And you have to have thick enough skin that, hey, sometimes people personalize their view with who they are. You got to divorce that. And I think it's the same thing to reaching out to people who are different. I mean, because of that people know who I am now, I have people come up to me and say nice things and not so nice things. And not always, but sometimes when they start with the not nice things, we end with like, wow, you're a little different than I thought you were. That's hard, right? And it's not super fun. I actually don't have a choice because people come up to me. But I think it's a skill we should all try to, I'll help you all as lawyers for sure. But I also think it's the sort of thing that like you're gonna find that there's a lot more you agree with people that you couldn't imagine you agreed with. But you gotta interact with them first, which is the kind of hardest part of the whole thing.
So I have some more audience questions. One thing that kind of is in the background of some of the things you've been talking about with respect to prosecutors and integrity and relationship with judges and decisions that they make and how they make the decisions is, of course, prosecutorial discretion. The prosecutors are given an enormous amount of power to make those decisions and choose cases and investigations. Is the lesson of the last year that we should narrow that prosecutorial discretion?
Yeah, I think that I think that's too broad a question. I would think of it more as this way. So there's different ways that we can bring reform to the criminal justice system as it exists now, right? And the three ways, you and I have talked about this, there's norms, there's laws, and there's the Constitution, right? And I think what we're seeing is today, a lot of the norms that I was raised on is like, this is how you do things. Turns out they're not written down anywhere, right? And turns out like there's not a thing in the Justice Department manual that says the president can't tell you to prosecute his enemies. Doesn't say that. Probably should say that now. And so I think, for me, I think a lot of the things that I was raised on as a prosecutor, we should think about making them more enforceable. And I do think there is a balance of, at one time, yes, prosecutorial discretion, having too broad discretion is one thing. But on the flip side, I'll just throw out, imagine today that there is a criminal act committed by the president or one of his cabinet members. How does that even get looked at? How would it even work? Like, they would not appoint someone outside the government, like I was appointed, certainly, right? Because they wouldn't want the facts to be followed. And like, if you talk to like people about this, there's not really even a counter argument. Well, we would do this. And so we don't have a mechanism right now to combat corruption in the executive branch. If you strip all discretion from prosecutors, or you have, they can't investigate, it really will hamper the investigation of corruption. So I think it's a challenging question. For me, it's more about not so much narrowing it, but making the parameters on the edges of it more enforceable, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, so that then norms. So as you said, norms, change the laws, change the Constitution. Change the Constitution, that seems like a big lift. Even changing laws, big lift. So are we then forced to think about reform through restoring norms, reforming norms, changing norms? Is that enough?
No, I think you have to look at all of it. I think, again.
So you want to do all of it?
Well, I think it depends on the particular issue and how big a problem it is. So, for example, if you think that, and again, put aside this administration, right? Like, just going forward, the lessons we want to learn. You look at Watergate, right? Watergate happened. It made people cynical. It made people distrust the government. The president was going after his enemies. Corruption in all different agencies, including the Department of Justice. What came out of that were reforms. Laws got passed, right? The Inspector General's Act, which really was a great help with the rule of law in this country. That came out of that. Public integrity section, which combated corruption for decades, directly comes out of Watergate. And so I guess I push back on the idea that we can't pass laws. We're not going to pass them tomorrow morning, and it's going to take sustained effort and sacrifice. But I wouldn't just go to, the only thing we can do is talk about norms. I think everything's on the table. We need to get, again, consensus about core values to base that on.
With respect to everything being on the table, there's a question about the role of state legal regulators, bar associations, and courts. Do they have a role to play in holding prosecutors to account?
Well, I think they do. I think
should they? Should it be? I mean, of course technically they do, but how? Like, is that part of the solution, that disbarring prosecutors who cross red lines, as you've talked about?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the rules for a prosecutor as a lawyer should be any different than anybody else. And so if I'm a defense attorney and I lie to the court knowingly, or I'm a prosecutor and I lie to the court knowingly, I think they're both wrongs that a bar association could deal with. I'm not sure I see a role for the bar associations to play a particular role because the federal government won't play the role itself. I'm not sure that that's the solution. My thoughts about it to date have been on how we make the Justice Department itself functional again, and function in a way where prosecutors, defense attorneys, other lawyers can be treated the same.
We got this question, which I think is a variation on a question you've talked about with respect to resignations. But if someone were to get a job offer from the DOJ today, should they take it or not?
If this one I can answer strongly and unequivocally. If that's a career you want to pursue, 100% you should continue pursuing it. The system is not going to work if good people are driven away from public service. And we're talking not about like just today, you as a law student or you as a 3L starting your career. We can't have a thing where like there's a year of things that happen that are, again, in my view, an attack on the rule of law, and everyone decides we're just going to give up on the project. So I would strongly urge people, if that was their interest, not to change that interest. I'm not trying to pretend. It might not be a different experience than what you had planned, but we need people who will run towards the fire, not away from it. And if you want to be a public servant, you have to either have that instinct or develop that instinct. And so that one I feel pretty strongly about.
There's a question about if you talked about your view of the rule of law, you talked about communication. This question is, do you think that the public's appreciation for the importance of the rule of law and what it means is waning? Has it become a kind of empty phrase that we throw around? Do people understand what it means?
Yeah, it's challenging because I think, when you talk among lawyers, you talk among lay people, you might get different answers. But one thing I would say about that, and this is again like one of the sacrifices or things you need to think through being a public servant, particularly being a prosecutor. Um, the public often judges prosecutors by a metric that I don't think is the metric to judge prosecutors, right? If you're a prosecutor, you follow the facts and you follow the law, and you go where you need to go based on that. They may result in a case that's really tough to win, and you might lose. But you're supposed to bring that case. It also may result in dismissing a case or not pursuing a case that everybody outside of your office who doesn't know all the facts thinks you're a coward for not pursuing. The public, you don't bring that case that everyone thought you should bring. They think you're weak and you stink, but it actually took more strength not to bring that case than to just follow public opinion on it. The prosecutors get rewarded for winning in court, and you should want to win in court because you shouldn't bring cases you didn't think were righteous. But at the same time, I don't know any prosecutors who've done it for a long time who haven't lost cases, because that means you're not bringing tough cases. And so the metric of how the public might measure this in a shorthand versus what career prosecutors in the department know is the ethic of who's really good at the job. Those are always going to be a little different. But with the rule of law specifically, I think it's up. This goes back to the communication point. I think it's up to people like the folks in this room to have conversations with people who didn't go to law school and who are friends who aren't in that world, and kind of break these concepts down to them in ways that are, they're not going to be a brief for the Supreme Court, but they're in language that people can understand, because it'll come back to common values. It'll come back to the common values that I think a lot of us share, whether we have a law degree or not.
And if you're having that conversation with somebody who's not at the law school and you're trying to explain what's at stake and why it's important, because we live in an age where there's a lot of cynicism, and so how do you communicate that? How do you communicate like the what's at stake here?
I think, my experience in life, the people I've known, people have a sense of fairness. They realize when things aren't fair, and being treated equally, right? Like an example of that is, nobody likes bullies. There's not anybody who's like, I actually do like bullies. Nobody does, right? Because it's unfair. It's a big picking on a little. And good prosecutors love standing up for vulnerable people, and they're not afraid to stand up against powerful people. People get that. You just need to put it in language that translates outside of, again, what you'd write in a brief. And so I think having those discussions about pick the topic and using language that is common to people who aren't lawyers, I just believe that there's a lot of stuff that we agree on that isn't in the main dialogue right now publicly, and that if we all said, hey, you know what, integrity matters more than anything else. I don't care if I agree with you on every policy thing, but I care if you're truthful. That's just what I care about. And we just all started making that the main thing we were talking about. I think that would bridge a lot of political divides. I really do. And I think we'd be all the better for it. It doesn't, whichever side of the political spectrum you're on, I think we'd be better for it. So that sort of common value stuff is what I'm talking about.
So the key to the communication is really returning to these first principles that you've been talking about competence, integrity, independence, fairness, things that the kind of starting points for a fair and respected Department of Justice.
Yeah, because once you do that, once you get common agreement, the truth is good, right? Then we could talk about, in subsequent conversations, about how do we apply that in certain situations. But we need to first get a little beachhead of like, we kind of agree with each other about this one thing, and then we can start talking about that. That is the art of persuasion. That's how you convince people of things. You find something that you can agree on. And as I said, these topics, I think, there is broad agreement. We just need to get in the room with people who don't maybe share the same view with us on other topics yet. And listen to them too, because being open to our view about how to apply a principle of integrity, maybe that needs to move a little too.
Okay, I'm going to finish on with a lighter question from the audience. And I'm just going to read it because it can, right?
Oh, geez.
You have a professional life more than most of us ever will, and your Wikipedia page states that you've run over 100 triathlons. Is that true?
Yes.
How do you manage to do so much? And do athletics help you manage your professional life?
You know the answer to this.
I do.
Yeah, for me, they do. I think one thing I've seen in people who are good at managing stress and good at kind of dealing with challenging things is you have to have some outlet. For me, it's competition is something that I like, and athletics are something I like, particularly athletics where you're competing against each other. It's good for me and it allows me to clear my head, but it doesn't have to be that. Everybody's got to have their something. I started my career with a lot of people, and some of them didn't stick with this stuff because the stresses of it and being able to compartmentalize it a little bit, they didn't have a tool for that. That's been a tool for me, and so it has very much helped me sort of in like clearing my head, decision making, things of that nature. Yeah.
Okay, Jack, I want to finish by thanking you for your service, for your leadership, and for coming to speak to us here today at Harvard Law School. So
Thank you all for having me. I appreciate it.
Here. So let me just say this. First, I just want to thank the members of my team that helped make this possible. So Dana Walters, who was running up with the questions, and Brian Fong, who were filtering them, did a fantastic job. Leah Plunkett and the staff from the dean's office. And then I just want to, I don't know, Alex was great at distilling, so I want to just 4 things for the students to think about here. 1, look and learn. That is, take every opportunity you can to come to an event like this. I commend all of you who were able to stay and learn and listen, even when you disagree, maybe especially if you see things that you don't agree with. That teaches you a lot. Second, love what you do and do everything to the best of your ability when you're doing it, even if you don't think you're going to stay, even if you're going to move on. Just excellence at what you do every single time. Third, know your red lines and think about them in advance. I tell my students all the time, and a reference that almost nobody will understand except these two, that before you take any job, you should have your Johnny Paycheck moment. Johnny Paycheck was a famous country western singer whose most famous song was "Take This Job and Shove It." And you need to remember what it is that someone can ask you to do that's too much. And then 4th, remember whatever your job is, never let go of the things that give you joy and passion. And with that, I want to thank 2 extraordinary people for an extraordinary conversation. Thank you. Thank you all.